He's notorious by name and even more notorious by nature. Conor McGregor's time in the public eye has been a roller coaster for both his fans and his haters. And for this video, we're going to look at his top 5 most controversial moments. Stealing the show. Look, watching a longtime training partner and friend succeed in a fight is obviously a very emotional experience. When you have such close ties to an athlete, you understand their struggles and what any subsequent victories mean to them and their overall career. However, when Conor McGregor appeared at a Dublin Bellator event in support of his teammate Charlie Ward, his reaction to Ward's beautiful knockout win was a bit over the top, to put it lightly. Ward had just managed to get the job done, and before he had even retracted his right hand, Conor had already jumped over the side of the cage in celebration. Now, that alone wouldn't be anything too outrageous. McGregor is certainly a very flamboyant personality. But when the veteran referee Mark Goddard angrily told Conor to leave the cage until the fight's result was officially called, he received a firm push from the UFC star. Conor then proceeded to wheel around the cage, eventually coming face to face with a commissioner, who he slapped in the face. The scene was quite chaotic, and though Conor was eventually removed from the building, he had once again succeeded in stealing the event's thunder. Sure, Bellator president Scott Coker had to put on a professional face and condemn the incident, but it was pretty clear that he was secretly delighted that McGregor had brought so much attention to what could have been a mid-level Bellator event. Funny how that works. In the end, the commissioner responsible released a statement criticizing Conor for endangering both the fighters and the commission staff. But all in all, there weren't too much in the way of ramifications for the Irishman after this latest controversy. A proper night in the pub. If there's a lesson to be learned from this next controversy, it's that if a famous cage fighter attempts to buy you a drink, just understand that there might be consequences if you refuse. And for one patron of the Marble Arch pub in Dublin, Ireland, he wasn't exactly starstruck as the superstar MMA fighter Conor McGregor interrupted his quiet pint with the offer of a free shot of whiskey. For whatever reason, the patron took a hard stance on McGregor's persistence, and before he knew it, Conor had unloaded a punch to the side of his head. The incident was captured on a security camera and quickly went viral. But for many fans, this was a new low for this former two-weight world champion. McGregor had certainly been on something of a downward spiral in his personal life, or at least from a legal standpoint. But when this news story emerged, it left a lot of us in shock over the levels he was stooping to. Whether he felt it was disrespectful or not, the man in question was under no obligation to give Conor the time of day. And when the time came to pay his dues, McGregor pleaded guilty to the assault and subsequently paid off his fine of €1,000. And though the financial loss was a tiny one, all things considered, McGregor certainly didn't do his public image any favors, especially as far as his standing among his fellow Irish people was concerned. Bad look for this pioneering force in Irish MMA. Crossing lines. We had to reserve one entry on this list for the entirety of McGregor's verbal assaults on his great rival Khabib Nurmagomedov. Lines were regularly crossed in terms of culture, religion, and family, and by the time both men had made it to the octagon, a feud had grown that was truly unlike anything we've ever seen. After his friend and training partner Artem Lobov had been publicly humiliated by Nurmagomedov, a fire was lit under Conor to take every possible stab at the eagle he could muster. This wasn't his competitive and comparatively more fun rivalry with Nate Diaz. These guys were out for blood, in a dynamic that truly doesn't have an equal in this sport. And through his attacks on Khabib's wife, his manager, his training partners, and some jokes about his religion, McGregor ensured that he well and truly had Nurmagomedov's undivided attention by the time UFC 229's fight night came around. The problem? Khabib, of the two, was the better fighter by some distance on the night, and after 4 grueling rounds, the champ moved in to close the show, latching onto a tight neck crank to force the tap and bring the bout to a close. Of course, he would have the last laugh as well, topping Conor's best efforts with his own theatrics, leaping over the cage to get a swing in at McGregor's extremely outspoken teammate Dylan Dennis. The brawl that ensued just so happened to take place on the most watched UFC pay-per-view event of all time. Sure, it wasn't exactly a good look for the sport, but Conor, in many ways, had made his bed through the abuse of Khabib in the lead-up to the fight, and on at least some level, you'd have to assume that the idea of jumping over the side of the cage to attack the enemy team was something he himself could respect. Your wife's in my DMs. He might have cut an angrier, perhaps even less creative version of himself when he engaged with Dustin Poirier in the lead-up to their trilogy bout, but Conor McGregor still managed to produce more than a few sound bites as the pair traded barbs. At this point in his career, McGregor seemed to be far too rich and far too secure to really care too much about what people at large thought about him. And as he did his utmost to rattle the cage of the man who had TKO'd him a few months earlier, the early signs suggested that nothing was off the cards as far as the trash talk was concerned. Tension brewed first between the Diamond and the Notorious when it emerged that Conor had not fulfilled his promise of a $500,000 donation to Poirier's The Good Fight Foundation, although McGregor maintained that this was down to unprofessionalism and a lack of transparency on Dustin's part. Where their second meeting at UFC 257 saw the pair's relationship looking pretty cordial and jolly, this one spark sent their UFC 264 trilogy bouts build up into pure chaos. There was a level of venom in McGregor's tone that he had reserved only for Khabib up until that point, and after repeatedly taking digs at Poirier's wife Jolie, to say that things were getting heated would be an understatement. So when Conor's leg gave out at the end of the first round, whatever disappointment the fans might have felt about the contest being over were quickly replaced by shock due to the fact that the show was far from over. Sitting up against the cage in what was likely some really excruciating pain, Conor proceeded to double down on everything he had said pre-fight, promising a violent end to his and Poirier's relationship, while again making sure to plug the after-party he was about to attend. Love him or hate him, Conor didn't squirm on the ground with his injury. He took to the mic like a real supervillain and ensured that he was cutting yet another legendary promo. A one-of-a-kind moment indeed, but also one that upset quite a lot of his fan base. UFC 223 Media Day. The UFC 223 Media Day was one of those infamous days in mixed martial arts history that you kind of needed to live through to fully appreciate. The UFC had already been left in panic stations after their originally scheduled vacant lightweight title showdown between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson fell out due to a freak injury to El Cucuy. Thankfully, Al Iaquinta, who was already booked to fight at UFC 223, was promoted to the main event slot, saving the card by keeping its biggest attraction with a body in front of him to smash. All things considered, the ship was back on course, and it looked as though it would be plain sailing for the promotional machine for the rest of Fight Week. However, a viral video showcasing Nurmagomedov and a crew of his friends cornering and humiliating SBG's Artem Lobov set off a sequence of events that eventually led to the biggest fight in UFC history. Upon seeing the video of his longtime friend and training partner being outnumbered and slapped by the Eagle due to comments the Russian Hammer had supposedly made in the past, an incredibly fired-up Conor McGregor immediately boarded a plane from Ireland to the US. Upon arriving in Brooklyn, Conor, along with maybe 20 others, the former champ gate-crashed UFC 223 Media Day and made a direct attack on the red corner team bus that contained Khabib. Next came the infamous dolly throwing, as McGregor realized that his adversary was not going to come off the bus to confront him. It was a chaotic scene, and one that resulted in injuries to Ray Borg and Michael Chiesa, facial cuts due to shards of glass from the windows that were broken. After fleeing the scene of the crime, a warrant was put out for McGregor's arrest, and UFC President Dana White, though no doubt seeing dollar signs in his eyes after this massive news story, publicly condemned Conor for his actions. Eventually, the Irishman turned himself in, and he was charged with 3 counts of assault, 1 count of criminal mischief, as well as menacing and reckless endangerment. A $50,000 bail was set, and Conor was forced to do community service while undergoing anger management classes. Of course, this moment of madness would actually be topped in some ways by Nurmagomedov a few months later, when he jumped over the side of the octagon to attack Team McGregor's Dylan Dennis. But at the time, there was the feeling that this was the single craziest day in mixed martial arts history.